The next week was clean the jewelry week at Lori's. So we spent my so we spent my Tuesday shift in her kitchen, a large room with a countertop wrapped around the perimeter and a freestanding island in the middle. She stood she stood at the island and unpacked and wiped down all the pieces, inspecting them for any damages or wear and tear, while I stood at the sink dropping each piece into a Tupperware of dual, diluted, diluted lemon scented ammonia to soak. I used a toothbrush to scrub the stones, and then I'd rinsed and laid them on the runner of the dish towels, spread spread on the counter. She she'd inspect them again to make sure nothing needed to be run through twice. It was good because we'd known each other for so long we didn't mind working in silence. There was no pressure to chat before, that is. You seem a little better today, she said. And I said, "Yeah, I guess." I've been thinking of Isaac when she said it, and then I felt immediately crappy for thinking of Isaac instead of thinking of my dad. But when I thought of my dad, I felt worse than ever. So it was kind of a no win situation. She passed me a handful of bracelets, her signature piece, the metal twisted and rounded with wires, that was threaded with different patterns of stones and pearls. Each pattern had a name: compassion, white coin pearls and crystals, peaceful, turquoise, and corrugated beads, dance, Amaz- um, Amazonite discs, and long, flat, freshwater pearls. It was the clasp that people loved the most about the bracelets, though, a custom twist thing she'd come up with when she first started working as an artist. A design that made it so easy to put the bracelet on yourself, so you didn't have to ask your husband or boyfriend or whoever to help you. I guess it was a huge deal for some women. The appeal of being able to put on your own accessories. People went nuts over that clasp. She made all different sizes, so you could always find one that fit right. Small wrists or big boned. Lori made sure everyone could wear her work. She was smart that way, and thoughtful. She wore a tank top and one of her long hippie skirts that day, and it was hot in the kitchen even though we had all the windows open, so she pulled the bottom and tied it in a knot at her hip while she talked. "Your mom told me about you taking a year off after graduation to travel. You're thinking of volunteering with Habitat?" she asked. "There's a lot of people in the world not nearly as fortunate as us, and working for an organization like that is a noble choice." I nodded and said thanks, but really I felt like a con. When I've been thinking of international programs, I'd been thinking for myself how great it would be far away doing something no one else I knew had done. I hadn't really been thinking about the people who needed help, hadn't thought of them first, at least. I haven't found a program. I've just haven't found a program at any of the state schools that I want to study, I said, unhooking each bracelet before dropping them in the solution. And then I was thinking, if I don't know to study, what I want to study, maybe I shouldn't go to college yet in the first place. Why rush getting there if I'm not sure what I'll do once I arrive? I switched the Tupperware lid around and picked the toothbrush to begin scrubbing. "You can learn a lot by traveling, Callie." Lori had a fistful of earrings in her palm that she held up to her face as she squinted. She shook her head and said, "These have faded. These have faded. The store must have been displaying them in direct sunlight." And then, as she began popping off the backings and dropping them into one bowl and the earrings into another, she finished her first thought with, "You can also learn a lot in college, even in colleges that aren't in Portland." I told her that it wasn't about Portland. It's weird initially it was it's weird. Initially it was wanting something totally different than I motioned to the toothbrush and space around me. This. But then this repeat motion became something different when my dad disappeared. I tried to think of a way to explain the simple fact of just wanting to go. That maybe there didn't need to be some big concrete reason. Maybe I just wanted to move to another country because it would mean moving to another country because it would mean exploring something new. I'd finished rinsing the bracelets and waiting for the next batch to clean a collection of necklaces. By one of she eyed one by one of her magnifying glasses. I just want to broaden my worldview, I told her, wondering if I'd lift the phrase from one of the pamphlets or websites. I want to live in another culture. I want to be somewhere completely unfamiliar and exciting. I think it'd be good for me to see other places. Preaching to the choir, Cal. It's your mom you've got to convince. Isaac picked me up on Wednesday, around noon, but in a city where most kids don't have cars, picking me up meant taking the bus stop to my house, meeting me there, and then paying for a bus fare to Fisherman's Wharf. He looked good, like he tried a little, but not too much. He wore his dark hair short, a nice break from the floppy mess a lot of the boys in school sported. And product free, no gel or any of that sculpting cream stuff. He picked a gray t-shirt with something written in French on it, worn over a black thermal lawn sleeve, and the kind of jeans that were sort of casual but nice looking too, not sloppy. Black tennis shoes and a metal bracelet. Simple. He smelled spicy when I opened the door, like cedar or sage, and I was glad. I'd stopped in the kitchen, put a few drops of vanilla behind my ears before he came. A trick my grandma taught me when she decided I was old enough to start thinking about likings, likes, about things like smelling nice. I ended up picking my wide-legged jeans and flip-flops to wear, but I borrowed a shirt from Maddie, a white short-sleeved, pleasant blouse she said was too hippie for her style, and I made sure to shower early enough in the day that my hair was dry and I could wear it down. "Hey, you look great," Isaac said when I came outside after he rang the bell. I mumbled, "Hey," without looking at him and forgot to say, "Thank you." We walked towards the bus stop, and he apologized for not having a car. "Maybe on the way back I'll spring for a taxi," he said, upscale like. But it was no big deal. I liked riding the bus. And when we took our seats, he let me have the window, like he knew that's what I wanted, even though I hadn't said so. Except for a few teenagers in the back, it was mostly empty, since it was still business hours. We sat about 6 inches apart, me looking out at the street at first, trying to think of and failing to find something interesting to say. But he nudged me eventually and said, "Don't look so serious. This is a fun thing. It's just me. Just me." But it was too soon to know what that meant. He was the kid who moved away, and even though we all pretended we knew him well enough to report ISS with authorities and imagine what his life was like. The truth was, I didn't know him at all, just me sitting 6 inches to my left with those perfect brown eyes. I wiped my palms on my jeans and tried to smile. He'd been kind of quiet back in fourth grade, but he must have grown out of it because he took the lead and filled the time talking about how bad work was that week. Like slitting my wrist boring, and how his dad had left that morning for a business trip. It's nice to have the house to myself sometimes. He told me he hated the time difference between Paris and San Francisco, and that he didn't get to talk to his mom as much as he'd like during the summertime. She's 9 hours ahead of me, so when she called this morning, I was eating breakfast and she was already finished with work for the day. Isn't that weird? Every so often, he'd do this funny thing and crack his jaw when he ran out of things to say. He'd open his mouth so wide I probably could have seen his tonsils if I was sitting in front of in front instead of next to him. Wide enough for me to think of a cartoon character like the Muppets or the Roadrunner if his beak came unhinged. I'd hear the pop of a small air-filled explosion inside his mouth, and then he'd close his lips. Maybe he had that TMJ thing my mom got sometimes when she was super stressed out. But I figured it was a nervous habit which made him seem less intimidating. Either way, I liked how I could smell the cinnamon toothpaste on his breath when he did it. It was the contradictions I noticed the most. The way he'd say something with confidence, but then look insecure, doing the jaw popping thing, or lowering his eyes and fidgeting with his fingers in his lap. The brave way he reached out to brush the hair from my face once we got off the bus, and stood on the corner deciding which way to go, but how he was too shy to hold my hand when we started walking. I noticed the steaming smell of crab as soon as we were on the sidewalk. The afternoon sun and the summer crowd warming the air on the wharf. Somewhere nearby, the Hyde Street cable car bell rang, and Isaac said, "See that there? That's the bell. That bell is exactly why I make sure to do one grossly tourist thing in the city each time I'm here. Not everyone gets to hear a cable car ding in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday." We walked past a cheap souvenir store and street performers doing magic tricks or playing music for money. Food vendors using metal tongs to lift huge white crabs from the pot of boiling water. A man paint a man painted gold from the head to foot stood on an overturned bucket, miming and posing for photos as tourists took pictures and dropped change into a black top hat in front of him. We made our way to the bay to check out the view and the hordes of sea lions lazing on the wharf, even though we both seen them a bunch of times. As we navigated the crowd, I bounced my eyes from Isaac to the swarm of faces drifting in the opposite direction. Always looking for my dad. Even since the photo at the museum, I've been spotting him all over the city. Not him, but someone who looked close enough to shoot a jolt through my body at least a few seconds before the person would turn, and I'd see that he was just a teenager in a puffy vest, or that man I'd been staring at, or that the man I'd been staring at didn't even wear glasses. The first time it happened was in CVS with Beckett buying snacks by the bus stop in my neighborhood before we headed to Hippie Hill. A man in the greeting card aisle. The thing was, my dad never would have bought a greeting card at CVS. He didn't believe in those long-winded sentimental poems you'd find in those cards. If he wanted a card, he'd make his own. Basic notes on folded pieces of graphic paper from work, or, when I was little, marker drawings on stolen pieces of construction paper from my craft sets. I knew he'd never be in that spot in the store on that day, but that didn't stop me from calling out his name. I shouted, "Dad!" When the man turned, it turned out to be someone who really looked nothing like him. Reddish blonde hair and round in the middle, a button-down shirt and leather loafers, except for the glasses. He was nothing like my father. The whole thing was pretty humiliating. Eventually, Isaac brought us sourdough bowls of chowder, and we walked down the waterfront to Pier 39, where we had a perfect view of Alcatraz. "Is this okay?" he asked, and I said absolutely, as we sat on the bench facing the bay. The food came in cheap square paper to go carriers, and I tried to balance the bread bowl with one hand and spoon the chowder with the other without spilling it, all the while paying attention to what Isaac was saying and looking only somewhat, if possible, totally not awkward. I bought tickets for the ferry, for the free 350 ferry out to Alcatraz, he told me. "I guess I should have asked how late you wanted to stay out. It's about a 3-hour thing total, I mean. But I figured if you were tired of me by then, you could just wear the headset for the tour and pretend we weren't together." He smiled, and then the smile changed quickly to anxiousness, and he added, "Not together. I know we're not together, but you know what I mean." And I nodded. "That was awkward," he said. He told me he got in the full Alcatraz package, the one that included the boat trip and the headsets and the souvenir map. Go big or go home. It sounds great. A full-on grapper experience, I teased. And then I explained that grappers were what we called tourists in the city, because they were wandering around, staring and pointing with their mouths hanging open. He liked that, and I liked the sound of his laugh. He told me about going to Alcatraz when he was a little kid, and said he didn't remember much except that he'd been disappointed that there wasn't any food. They told me it was an island. I guess I thought it had some kind of fair or festival with rides and prizes or something. I expected funnel cakes and cotton candy. I'm pretty sure I threw a tantrum and had to catch an early ferry back. It was nice that he talked so much, because it gave me the chance to watch him. He had short eyelashes, the exact same color of his hair. He often talked with his hands. "I like this," he said, reaching over. not touching but almost touching the horn pendant around my neck. What does it mean? So I told him about my grandmother in Chicago and how I've been missing her more since my dad disappeared. She was his mom, and it had been like a weird chain reaction, I said. I think of him all the time, but I think of her more now, too. He nodded. She used to wear this when I was a kid. It's an Italian symbol to keep away the bad spirits. In front of us, the woman walking her dog stopped to answer her cell phone. The pier was crowded with shoppers and street performers and tourists wandering around. What's this about? What about this? I hooked my fingers under his bracelet, his skin against my skin for a quick second before I leaned back. He popped it off his wrist and handed it over. Guitar strings, he said. A girl in one of the bands that plays at the club where I work at makes them. Cool, right? I couldn't tell what bugged me more. That Maddie and I hadn't fought to do that, making jewelry from old guitar strings, or was just our style. Or the fact that he was wearing a bracelet some other girl gave him. Some girl in a band in France. But then he said, "You should keep it. It goes with your whole..." He raises his hand and waved it around or toward, or at me. Your whole thing. And what thing is that? I said, catching an edge in my voice. No, it's a good thing. The music thing. The not looking like a clone of everyone else thing. So I look weird. That's not what I meant. I should stop talking, he said, but then he kept going. You're just different, that's all. I noticed as soon as I saw you at the club, you don't worry about what everyone else is doing or wearing or whatever. It's a good thing. I tried to hand the bracelet back, but he wouldn't take it. Keep it, really. Every time you look at it, you can remember how I acted like an idiot on our first date, he smiled. The water was rough on the boat, and about 4 minutes into the ride, Isaac said, "Maybe I didn't think this through," he said, shifting his face shifting to a pale cream instead of his usual honey brown. "Do you get seasick?" I asked. "I'm not sure, but I guess we're about to find out." He let me pick the seats when we first got on, and I'd chosen the best ones near the front where the boat was open, and we could see the ocean and the islands getting closer as we moved towards it. But I told him it would be better to sit where he couldn't see the water if he wasn't feeling well. So we moved to a back bench in the corner. I started digging in my bag for gum, remembering my grandmother's tricks about peppermint calming down an upset stomach. When I told him what I was looking for, he pulled out 2 peppermint patties out of his pocket. He handed one to me and turned the wrapper of the other one with his teeth before popping it in his mouth. "You're like a walking vending machine," I said. "You say that like it's a bad thing." We hit the wave or some kind of bump in the water, and he gripped the edge of the seat, white knuckles and eyes closed. "Try not to think about it," I said. "Think of something else," I told him. I almost told him to count backwards from 12, but I figured that would sound weird, so instead I said, "Tell me a story." "Maybe you could do the talking for a little while?" he asked. But I said no, it would be better if he was the one talking. "If I'm talking, you'll still be distracted by the motion," I said. And that's when he told me about the underwater power plant. Isaac said that the PG&E was in the middle of planning a huge launch of wave farms, turbines under the sea that used the ocean currents to generate electricity. Tidal power technology, he said. The Electric Power Research Institute recently identified the bay as one of the world's best candidates for electricity generation using tidal power and technology. PG&E was planning to put up to 1.5 million to help fund a test site. This huge study is supposed to start next year. My dad told me all about it. So there will be windmills along the floor of the bay. I I said I thought immediately. I thought immediately of my dad, of how much he loved the idea. Turbines, yep. Maybe one day, he said. Soon, possibly, if the stu- if the studies worked and they can prove it would be a reliable source of electricity, and then it doesn't harm the sea animals. He smiled that that smile that shot waves through my belly. Can you imagine? We'd be up here fishing off charter boats, or swimming at Ocean Bay, kayaking or windsurfing or whatever. And down there, there'd be turbines churning the ocean floor, making electricity. It's amazing, right? By the time he finished telling me about the underwater energy plant, the boat had and the boat ride had ended, and his face looked the right color again. Alcatraz stopped op- operating as a federal prison in the early 1960s, but it was a big historical draw for the city. And I had been to the island before, as a kid with my mother and Beckett and Lori, one summer afternoon when they were trying to think of interesting things for us to do. But that had been in the fourth, maybe fifth grade, and everything looked smaller and more remote than I remember. We walked past the residential apartments where the family members of guards and other employees of Alcatraz had lived. When we saw the warden's house, the guard's tower, and the power plant too. The walls were cracked and the ground had grown messy and wild, the whole place feeling like a ghost town. We wandered through the recreation yard and tried to envision what it would have been like to be able to see the city from the jail yard. So huge and alluring, just to be on the far side of the water and to know you were super close but endlessly and impossibly far away. We picked up our headphones from the desk in the front of the cell house and started our audio tour. The record the recorded voice directed us around the prison building, explaining the history, its words intercut with stories told directly by the guards and inmates, or maybe just actors pretending to be them. It walked us through the rooms and cells, the space feeling tight and hot, and told us about the elaborate escape plans that never worked, and the one that came close, the one that resulted in the Battle of Alcatraz. We watched other tourists took turns standing inside the cell, their hands on the bars looking out, while friends and family members snap photos from the other side, behind the bar's pictures taken at Alcatraz. It was dark and cold out by the time we got in line to wait to get back on the ferry. Pretty great, right? Isaac said, and I nodded. It's good, I think. He said, to remember how many different ways people live their lives out there. Then he popped his jaw. My thoughts seemed blurry, caught between being there with him and being inside those headphones, hearing the noises of the cell doors creaking in the voices of inmates. And before I'd even decided to do it, took his hand in mine, just like that, I felt so much better and more interesting and more real than anything that happened between Andrew Parker and me. The ferry warmed quickly with the heat of all the passengers, and we slumped on a bench in the back again, our hands incessantly touching, thumbs rubbing palms, fingers tracing lines, and I felt him everywhere, in a million different places, my heartbeat swooshing between my ears, as if I'd been running for hours. The Ready Go earthquake preparation website talked about the importance of fastening all your bookshelves to the walls. So after work the next day, I stopped by the hardware store to buy the necessary equipment, figuring it would be easier if I just did it myself and didn't try to explain my mother why I decided it needed to be done. Place large or heavy objects on lower shelves. Store breakable items in closed cabinets with latches. Mirrors, picture frames, and other hanging items should be secured to the wall with closed hooks or earthquake putty. Do not hang heavy objects over beds, sofas, or any place you may be seated. I planned to reorganize my bedroom accordingly, but first I had to buy drywall, inkers, and hooks, and stud finders, and lawn fat nails. All stuff I hadn't found in the garage when I'd looked earlier that week. The hardware store sat in the strip shop from a few blocks from my house, squeezed between a laundromat and an eyeglass shop, and a few doors down from an amazing smelling bakery that sold the best macarons I'd ever had. I decided that it was just what we needed, my mother and I, macarons, brightly colored cookies, the perfect blend of almond and sugar flavors. Coconut was my mother's favorite, but I like burgundy tinted raspberry ones. We used to do that sometimes. Eat dessert before dinner, just the two of us after school before my dad got home from work. Other times she slipped me a biscotti or freshly made cannoli she picked up from the bakery near campus. Don't tell your dad, she said, and I'd eat it while she finished cooking dinner, and we waited for him to come home. I hadn't thought of that in forever, and that's when I saw Beckett's Jay, kissing another boy. A boy that was absolutely not Beckett, kissing a boy outside the bakery that smelled like chocolate and butter when you walked past. Jay had one hand tucked in the pocket of the boy's corduroy, and the other hand was on the boy's waist, their mouths fused and ravenous, tugged at one another. like they were eating or auditing for a B-list movie. One of those films where you can tell that the actors are trying too hard, mouths open and eyes closed, their hands running all over. It was definitely not the first time they'd kissed. I stood there watching as one hand moved from the back pocket to a neck as the palms ran over the shoulders, fingers dug through clumps of hair. The other boy noticed me staring when they pulled apart and said, "What, Jesus?" And then Jay saw me too. His face dropped, like a chin on pavement kind of dive. And he said, "It's not what you think," in that predictable sentence that proved the exact opposite. But I turned away before he had a chance to say anything more, taking off down the street with that plastic bag full of disaster relief tools slapping against my leg as I ran.